Russia is not planning a nuclear attack. America is spreading rumors. This time, Putin announced. Russian President Vladimir Putin said that there will be no need to use nuclear weapons in the Ukraine war.
Единственным настоящим таким серьезным гарантом украинской государственности, суверенитета и территориальной целостности могла бы быть только Россия, которая и создала сегодняшнюю Украину. Цель сегодняшней возни вокруг ядерных угроз и возможного применения ядерного оружия, она очень примитивная. И я вряд ли ошибусь, если скажу, в чем она заключается. Ну, я уже говорил о том, что вот этот диктат западных стран, их попытка надавить на всех участников международного общения, в том числе на нейтральные или дружественные нам страны, заканчивается ничем. И они ищут дополнительные аргументы для того, чтобы убедить наших друзей или нейтральные государства в том, что нужно всем вместе противостоять России. Мы же не случайно обнародовали данные спецслужб по поводу того, что готовят какой-то инцидент с так называемой грязной бомбой. Это же вот просто сделать. Мы даже знаем, где примерно это делается. Ну, остатки там ядерного топлива немножко преобразовали. Технологии, имеющиеся на Украине, позволяют это сделать. Загрузили там в точку У или куда-нибудь другой, подорвали где-то это устройство, сказали, что это Россия сделала. Нанесла ядерный удар. Но нам не нужно этого делать. У нас смысла нет никакого. Ни политического, ни военного. Значит, нет, это же делают. И это я дал указание Шойгу прозвонить всем его коллегам и проинформировать об этом.
Western countries, including America, are playing a dirty and dangerous game around Ukraine, he said. But we never once talked about the use of nuclear weapons, Putin said, adding that threats of a nuclear attack were repeatedly raised to provoke neutral countries against Russia. The Russian army has started nuclear drills from Wednesday amid the war in Ukraine. Putin also observed the exercise of the Nuclear Strategic Force, the force responsible for the country's nuclear weapons. In the picture published by the Russian official news agency RIA, the Russian president was seen watching the preparations for nuclear war on the television screen. Recently, some countries like America and Britain have expressed their fears. US President Joe Biden has also warned Moscow about this. In this situation, Putin's comments are considered significant by a group of diplomats. According to them, in the face of international pressure, he was forced to soften his tone about the nuclear attack. The Russian Nuclear Strategic Force exercise was held for the first time since Putin's announcement of military operations in Ukraine on February 24. Earlier, the Russian military has tested nuclear missiles from land and submarines. Some Western media recently claimed that Putin may test nuclear bombs deep in the Black Sea to increase pressure on the US-led military alliance NATO and Ukraine. Let's take a look at what the US media is saying about Putin's nuclear attack.
Russian tanks crashed across Ukraine's borders on February 24, 2022, markedly escalating a war that had been confined for years to the eastern part of the country. In the calamity that has followed, many have warned of the increasing risk of nuclear war, some warnings coming directly from the mouth of the man who started the war, whose country also has the world's largest stockpile of nuclear weapons, Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Putin is threatening to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine or in the West if he doesn't get his way in Ukraine. And he's not getting his way in Ukraine. There's no sign that this mobilization of the extra troops is going to do anything, at least in the short term, possibly longer than that, to reverse these quite startling Ukrainian gains that we've seen. His military is losing. So will he back down from this threat? It does make you a little bit nervous, but all the analysts and the officials I've spoken to still think it's a remote possibility.
If the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, we will without question use all the means at our disposal to protect Russia and our people. This is not a bluff.
Russia has an arsenal of several thousand of these low-yield weapons. And we're talking in that case about an explosion about 1/15 of the size of the Hiroshima explosion, which, as we know, was enormous and devastated a whole city. They were built with the sort of massed troop formations in mind that were imagined for the next World War, for the Second World War, when you had lots of troops concentrated in one place. The Ukrainian battlefield is 1,500 miles long. So even if you dropped a nuclear weapon on one of those front lines, you wouldn't kill that many troops. Meanwhile, you're escalating massively with the West and drawing perhaps the Americans in, which they almost certainly don't want to do.
Putin's illegal annexations of 4 regions of Ukraine has led to speculation that by treating those areas as part of Russia, the Kremlin may be able to say they are defending Russian soil.
Russian nuclear doctrine says that if the existence of Russia is threatened, then tactical nuclear weapons can be used in a first strike scenario to protect the integrity of the Russian state.
This isn't the first time Russia and the West have started to climb the nuclear escalation ladder.
We insist on an equal balance of forces. And given the overwhelming evidence of Soviet violations of international treaties concerning chemical and biological weapons, we also insist that any agreement we sign can and will be verifiable.
Reminds me very much of the situation back in 1983. In November of that year, the Soviets prepared a full nuclear assault upon the West. Reagan in the White House was really turning up the heat on the Soviet Union, economically, militarily, in rearming the United States with a fantastic new generation of stealth weapons, of aircraft, of ships, of missiles. But also in the rhetoric that he was using against the Soviet Union. He called the Soviets an evil empire. He called them at one point in 1983 a terrorist state. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, was led by a man called Yuri Andropov. He'd been the head of the KGB, and he brought a sort of KGB sense of paranoia to his reading of the situation. And that paranoia really grew in Andropov's mind in the year 1983. He didn't understand that Reagan's talk was very much to appeal to his constituency in America. Andropov actually believed that he was seriously threatening the Soviet Union with a preemptive nuclear assault. It's that sense of paranoia we can detect in the Kremlin today. And of course, Putin was a KGB man.
Putin's actions are a sign he's struggling. He's not going to scare us, and he doesn't or intimidate us.
In its aggressive anti-Russian policy, the West has crossed every line. We hear constant threats against our country and our people.
It's not just Putin vaguely threatening the use of nuclear weapons. People like Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov and other allies have called for escalating the conflict.
It's terribly dangerous once you start throwing around talk of nuclear weapons. It gives lots of people ideas. It makes some countries that haven't quite got them yet think about whether they should be working harder to get them. It's still extremely unlikely, but it's a little bit more likely than it has been for at least 30 years and perhaps even longer than that.